Welcome to Winter Park. The overall dimension of this piece is 24 inches by 16 inches. You might be thinking that it's large, but the good news is it's made of multiple pieces that you can easily store separately. Because it's modular, it also makes it easy to tackle as much or as little of the project as you like. Even if you're not interested in building something like this, I am going to cover some techniques that you might find useful in other projects. I'll be covering how to assemble the pieces, creating dimension with paper, how to suspend paper images, making icicles, snow, building the frozen pond with skaters, and building a fountain. Now, the images that I have used in this project come from a combination of a new digital image set called Winter Park and a new collage sheet and two of my older collage sheets. In terms of the digital image set, it has all of the architectural pieces that you see. So the structures, the clock, the animals, the statues, and it also includes the skaters and the sleigh from the Ice Follies collage sheet. Now, the nice thing about a digital set, if you're not familiar with what that is that the images are all separate and they are all files so that you have the ability to print just one image. You can print it as many times as you want, and you can also make it a different size. Now, the ones in this digital image kit are sized for this project, but you could change them for whatever you want to use them for. Then you've got the Ice Follies collage sheet, which has all your skaters and your sleigh, and then there's two of the older sheets, Baby It's Cold Outside and Falling Leaves. And I've used some of the wintry dressed women from these two collage sheets to add to the other images I've used in this project. I'm going to start talking about the base, that's the pond. If you look at the top, starting on the left, those are the papers that I used for this project. You can see there's a stone paper, 12 by 12 paper, and I use that for a larger base that goes underneath the 9 by 9 by 1 platform that you see to the right. Then there's a white piece of cardstock. There's a piece of silver paper, and it has a metallic look to it. And then you see some strips of brick. Now, that was a larger 12 by 12 sheet where I've cut up the brick strips to fit around the 9 by 9 by 1 platform. Then if you go down below, the first thing I did is work on figuring out the dimensions of the pond. And so I took the cardstock and cut it the size of the platform, the top of the platform. Then I took the silver piece of paper, and the size was just a size that I had. It actually was a piece cut from a 12 by 12. But it was large enough for this, and I put it on top of the white cardstock to mark the boundaries of where the silver paper would be. And then once I had my boundaries, I drew an outline of where I wanted the edges of the pond to be. And then I cut that area that I've marked out, and then the silver paper goes underneath that. Now, in terms of starting to put together the snow, if you look at the top left-hand image, you can probably notice this the best in this image. Before I assembled the silver paper behind or glued it behind the white paper, I sprayed it with some frosting spray. It's a kind of spray, if you've seen my tutorials about frosting bottles, altering them. It's a spray that you use to just frost glass, and so I just sprayed that lightly on the silver just to give it a little bit more dimension. Then I used paper clay. I took bits of paper clay and I put some glue on the surface of the platform and then pressed the clay onto the glue and kind of made mounds around the edge. So this is how I'm kind of creating some dimension that the snow will go on top of. I let that dry. Now, when it dries, it's going to turn a much lighter color. It's not completely like stark white, but it's fairly white. So if you go to number 2, it's dried. And now, if you look at the difference between 1 and 2, you can see that I have gone back in, and now that main bulk is glued and dried, I've gone back in with more clay and made the transition between the edge of the clay and the paper smoother. So I've added more clay around the edges, smoothed it down with my fingers, and just made that just a nice smooth transition between the clay and the paper. Now if you go down to number 3, you can see that now I've started adding my snow. And what I decided to use for snow, and for 2 reasons. One, I wanted something really fine. And secondly, I have a lot of this. It's a white embossing powder. So it's very powdery. It's white. It's not a translucent. It's a opaque white. I have a very large container of it, and I thought, why not use it for this? Now I'm not embossing it. I'm just gluing it to the mounds of clay. And to do that, I painted the clay and the white paper with glue, and then I sprinkled the embossing powder on top of that, and then let that dry, and then shook off the excess, and then used a brush to brush off any more of the excess. And so I just kept adding more of the snow until the embossing powder for the snow until I got it the way I liked it. Then on the next piece, you can see number 4 is the last step, and what I did was I came in with some glossy accents and painted the silver, the pond area, to give it more of a shine so that it looked more like ice. And I didn't want you to see brush strokes, but it was very hard to avoid doing that. Even though glossy accents likes to level itself, if you paint it on, you're still going to see some brush strokes. So what I did is I took the brush and I did a swirling motion, so that way even when it dried and you could see just a little bit of that, it looked more like the skaters had skated there, like there were marks in the ice from the skate. So you can see this picture, it's pretty shiny. Now that's right after I put the glossy accents on. Now it's not going to be quite that shiny when it's done, but it will still shine like it's ice. And in some of the pictures you can kind of see that. And you'll also notice in some of the pictures that you can see the figures, the reflection of the figures on the ice, which is kind of cool. And also some of the reflection depending on the angle that the light's coming from and that you're looking from. You can see some reflection of the architecture and also of the trees. Now it looks a lot more shiny, and the shadows are even better when you look at it in real life as opposed to looking at it in a photograph. Now here you can see a picture of the pond with the skaters on it before I added some of the other stuff, and I took this photo so that you could have a better look at what everything looks like. Now I've decided to place the skaters around the edge of the pond so that when you look straight on that you get a really nice view of the fountain in the background, particularly if you use the front piece. So that when you look through, you see that and it's not completely blocked by skaters. Now this picture is a good example of, you could just do this part of the project. You could just make a skating rink or pond and then have some architecture behind it and then a tree like you see there, and just stop and that's it. Or you could go further and do some of the other pieces. Now the trick here is I need to suspend all these skaters as if they were standing in the pond skating. And obviously, you know, they're flat, so there's nothing for them to stand on. So one of the tricks I use is I glue something to the backs of the images that I can use to poke through whatever surface it is. Now, if it's a more porous surface, like say styrofoam, and I have a lot of surface area to glue something, I usually use a toothpick, a flat toothpick. But in this case, I'm going through hardship board, and I have very little area to attach something because the legs are so narrow and you've got these little skates. So what I decided to do was use steel pins, and I simply snipped off the head of the pin. Now what you need to do if you've never done this before is, first of all, whatever side you're snipping off wants to fly away. So I would suggest holding the pin side, the long pin side with the point, hold that side, and then snip the head side. So if anything flies off, it's the head and not the sharp pin. Plus, I always wear safety glasses because of the fact this stuff flies in the air when you snip it off. So then you can see that I've glued that behind. I use little glossy accents to glue the pin behind each one of the skaters. And then what I did was I came back in with a reverse image of the skaters and put that on the back. So if you look at either side of the skater, you will see the image. Now, you could choose just to put some decorative paper. And if you're going to do that, you would probably put your image, glue your image on the decorative paper, but leave a slot to slip in the pin before you glue that part down, because it would be very hard at this point to glue this down on decorative paper and then try to cut it all out again. So I do glue it down first and then just leave that slot that you can stick that pin through, and then add a little glue in there and you've got it. And then I poked holes in the pond, and then at the far bottom there on the right, you can see where I have added some more glue, it's glossy accents, to the head of the pin, or the bottom of the pin. And now that's after it dried on the top. So there was a little glue on the pin. I stuck that through the hole. I let that dry, and I had to put some things around the skaters to support them while they were drying. Then I flipped the whole thing over and then added a little drop of glue around each one of the pins just to make it extra secure. And then it's really hard to hide all of that where it's going through into the pond. So I did add some bits of ice. It's diamond dust is what that is, and I'll show you more about that later. And so I added some more glossy accents onto the pond, and then added a little bit of the ice, and then I also added globs of ice other places on the pond, because I would guess that they weren't coming through with the machine and cleaning a pond off every day. So I would assume that there would be other things sitting on the pond. And you can see in that picture, you get a good idea of how glossy that looks now, because that's dried, and now you can see reflections of the skaters, and you can see reflections of the architectural piece in the back. Now here I'm going to show you how I create dimension with flat paper images, and the best way to do that is to use bits and pieces of the original image that are popped up one on top of each other. And I think you can get some sense of the dimension in this picture, but in real life it looks even more so. In fact, the stairs really look like stairs. So if you look at the top, the first picture on the top left, you see all the bits and parts that I cut out. Now, in the digital kit, you've got the solid back piece, the folly, and then I have already separated out all those little bits and pieces for you, so you don't have to print it, the big piece of, over and over again to get all the little pieces, because they're all separated. And I have backed all of that with a lightweight chipboard just to make it stiff. If you don't have lightweight chipboard, you can use a heavy cardstock. And so I went about gluing all those pieces back on top of the other pieces, and I used double foam stick tape. You can see the tape in the bottom image where I show you the stairs. Now, there are a lot of products out there, pop dots and other things to pop stuff up, whatever you like using. It just needs to have some space, and it needs to be adhesive on each side. And so once I do that, you can move to the next picture, which has the whole thing put together, and you can see a piece of heavy chipboard. And what you need to do is, when you're going to glue something tall like this, particularly since I also glued the tree to it, it's going to be very heavy, and it's going to need support when you attach it to the back of the pond. And so you need to make it as stiff as you can. So I cut this heavyweight chipboard 6.5 inches by 5 inches, and the size just had to do with a size that would fit, that you wouldn't see behind the folly. And then I left an extra inch. Now that inch is where you're going to attach it to the back of the pond. And that way the stuff that's popped out will just hang right over the pond, and then that whole 1 inch strip will be attached to the back. And that will give you enough support that all this will stand up. Now, to make the stairs look more like stairs, what I do is I put 3 layers of double stick tape at the very bottom of the stairs. And when I glue the stairs on, I glue the top of the stairs, the individual piece, to the top of the stairs on the folly, and then that is kind of lifted up by the double stick tape at the bottom. So you get it ends up being at an angle, with the top being glued right to the folly and the bottom being popped up at the bottom, and that's what gives you that dimensional stair look. Now I want to talk about how I decorated the folly. and also about making icicles. Now, one of my favorite ways to do this, and an easy way to do this, particularly if the icicles are hanging and they're separated from the paper, and in this case, because I've popped everything out, all these things are sticking out beyond the thing behind them. You need to do something where the icicles are separate and not attached to the, or not on the paper itself. Now, if you were putting icicles right on the paper, you could do this without using the technique that I'm doing here, because you could just draw icicles with glue and then sprinkle whatever you wanted on it. But with this, I actually need something for them to hang from, and it needs to be clear so that you can see through the ice. So what I use is transparency, and it's actually the kind that you buy that can run through your printer. And that means that one side is very glossy and smooth and one side is rough. And it's the rough side is what you print on that absorbs the ink. And that's the side you want to glue on, because you'll get a better bond between the glue and the icicles. So I cut it in strips, and then each strip I just cut icicle shapes just in a long row. And then once you finish this, you can cut however much of it you want. Then I apply glossy accents to the little icicles on the strip, and then sprinkled it with the diamond dust. And the diamond dust, it looks like ice crystals, and it's a very chunky kind of ice crystal. Another option for you would be to use, if you wanted something maybe sparkly but maybe not as rough, is maybe use some glitter, some transparent glitter, sparkly glitter. And that would also be a good option on your snow. And if I'd had some, I would have done that, is add patches of a transparent glitter to your snow. And that would give you the smooth look, but also give you that kind of sparkling look that the snow has. So then just let it dry, and then cut up however much you want. And then again, use more glossy accents to attach the icicles to your structure. Then if you look at the top particularly, and then in the staircase area, you'll notice that I've also added more snow. And again, if you want the snow to be bulky, then you want to put some clay down. If you want the snow to be smoother, then which is what I did, except for mostly just on the pond and a couple other areas, most of it, I just added some more glue and then sprinkled the embossing powder on top of that. And I just put it in places where I thought, okay, well, this is stuck out, so the snow would gather here, would gather there. So wherever you want to put it. And then in the folly, I added this little fountain with the fish and the bowl. I first painted it. I used patina paints, which are paints that are made for metal. And I have that in the supply list. And I also then used some Gilder's paste to add some green and some turquoise patina color to it. And then so it would look like it was aged copper. And then on the fish, of course I glued that to the back of the folly. From the fish, I glued more of the icicles around the mouth of the fish. And then down below in the little bowl where the water is caught, I added a bunch of clay just to fill it up, and then added some more of the ice and a little bit of snow, and then glued some more crystals on the bowl hanging down. So that kind of made this whole thing look frozen. You'll also notice there are angels. Those are kind of popped out again from the folly. And again, I laced them with ice and snow, and anything like that I at least put, if you're not going to put the reverse image, then at least some cardstock, something just to make it a little stiffer so that it stands. And then you can see that now that folly is glued to the back of the pond. Now, if you wanted to make this even easier to take apart and put away, you could always use some thin Velcro when you attach the folly to the back and not permanently glue it. And that way, when you want to take it down, you just pull that off, and then it's not as bulky to store. Now, another option is to add the entrance on the front, so that you make this whole seam between the front and the back. And now I'm going to show you a different method to bring stiffness. That way you can see two different ways to do this. If you don't have heavy chipboard, or if, like in this case, you've got this opening that you need to cut, and that's kind of hard to do with the real heavy chipboard. So instead I use balsa wood. This is very thin wood. It's stiff, and you can usually find it at craft stores, and I know some of the hardware stores carry this as well, like the big ones, Home Depot. And you just want to cut strips of this. I first mounted the image onto, it's not, it's a heavier paper board. It's not chipboard, but it's white, but it's a heavier paper board that comes in paper that I buy. So I use that first just to make it a little stiffer. Then I put the strips of balsa wood in there, and then I did a reverse image on the back. So especially for this one, for the other one I didn't do a reverse image because it's the whole back of the scene. But this one, if you look in at the pond at different angles, you would see the back of this. So I put the image on the back, and I've also done all that popping out in the front, just like I did on the other one. And again, those images are separated in that digital kit if you want to use them. Now the difference in this stair is if you're going to use this staircase with the pond, you're going to have to cut the staircase down. So if you look at the first image and then you look at the image on the far right, you'll notice the staircase isn't as high. So you need to cut away some stairs so that the staircase is level with the pond. And of course I did the same technique with the stairs in that I attached them at an angle with the double stick tape at the bottom and then gluing the top against the image itself. And then you can also see that I've added snow, I've glued lots of icicles, there's an owl from the digital kit, there's the lion statues from the kit, so just to dress up the whole scene. And now that again would glue right on the front of the pond. Same trick if you want to use some Velcro, then you can use that to attach it, and then you can pull it off when you go to store the item. Now here you've got some good images to show you how the two pieces look put together. And you can also see some other things, like you can see the tree glued behind the folly in the back. And one of the reasons I glued it was that I could raise the tree up higher than it would have been so you could see more of it behind the building. And then behind that, you can see that I've added the bridges a bridge, I've just printed it twice from the digital kit, and again put icicles on it, put some images of ladies shopping or walking, and that kind of dressed up the back. And it was a balance for the things that are in the front. Now, I did not glue the pond and the folly in the entrance down to the platform that you see underneath it, again, so that I could just pick that up and store it separately. Now, I added the bottom, the platform below, and that's just made out of 3 layers of heavy cardstock, or heavy chipboard, and I did that just so it would be stiff. I covered it with the stone paper, and I did that so I could accommodate the 3-dimensional tree that you see in the back there. And then so that is a separate piece. So you've got both the bridges are separate, the folly, the entrance, and the skating area are separate. And you, like I said, you can make it more separate if you just attach the front and the back differently. Then the base is separate. The tree is attached, and you'll get a better look at that when I get to a further point. And then the 2 pieces in front, which I will also talk about, they're both separate as well. So this thing, the whole thing just kind of pulls apart and can be stored easily. Now I used various trees throughout the scene, and I used a couple of small and a large tree like the ones that you see at the very top on the left, and they are one-dimensional chipboard, die-cut chipboard. I painted them first and then covered them in glossy accents and then sprinkled the diamond dust on them to get the sparkle. And then the other tree, the 3-dimensional tree, what it is it comes as 2 pieces. Now I used 2 different sizes and I combined them in one tree to make the tree much fuller. And so I took the large one, and if you look at the top on the right, you can see the 2 pieces, and you can see there's a slit. There's a slit cut in each trunk so that they just slide one on top of the other at 90-degree angles to each other. And then you see down below on the left, you can see the 2 slid together. Now what I did with the smaller tree, of course, it comes with 2 pieces with the slits. I just cut both of those pieces in half and glued. I have 4 pieces now, and I glue each of the pieces in each slot between the large tree, and that just made this big full tree. I painted it, and then I did the same trick with the diamond dust in adding glossy accents and then sprinkling the diamond dust on that. And then if you look at the picture of the finished tree below, I also did the same trick with the clay. I just stuffed a lot of clay around the tree and mounded it up and smoothed it out, and then covered all that with ice, or I'm sorry, the snow, the powder. And then I added the little fox from the digital image set. So one of the things that I thought would be fun to add to this is a frozen fountain. I was really tempted to put this fountain in the middle of the pond, but if I had, I wouldn't have that much room for the skaters, and it would block the view from the front to the back, and it would completely block the whole center of the folly. So I ended up having to compromise and put it on the outside in another little separate area. Now this is just made with some wood, clay, and paper mache. And so the base, if you saw one of my previous tutorials where I had a garden and I showed you how to make a pond with a fountain going into the pond and koi fish and whatnot, you would have seen the bottom of this paper mache box. So I had the lid left over. So I decided, oh, the lid would be perfect for the base of the fountain. And now, of course, I need to dress it up, and the best way to do that, or the easiest way to do that, is with paper clay. And so I use the mold that you see up there on the top right, and I added the clay to that. Now, because I'm going to have to glue the clay onto the paper mache before it dries, or it's not going to bend, I cannot let it dry completely in the mold. But also, I need to make sure that I clean away as much of the excess clay as possible. And I think I've demonstrated that to you in previous tutorials, but I'll just mention again, I just use my finger to wipe away as much as the excess clay that's surrounding the actual indentation that you're putting the clay in to make the mold. I usually put the clay in, I use a roller, something that rolls it as flat as possible, and then just pull away all that excess clay. Now, even if there's a little bit left, as you can see below, I have glued the wet clay onto the paper mache, but you can get in there with an X-Acto knife, either before you put it on or after, and just kind of pick away any excess that you didn't get to. And then you can still afterwards come in with a little sander and sand away any little bits and pieces. But since you're going to be painting over this, it doesn't have to be as neat as it would be if this was separate. And it's going to have ice and snow and stuff like that, so you don't have to be crazy perfect about that. I do let it dry just a little bit so it doesn't fall apart while I'm trying to pull it out of the mold. And I pull it out of the mold by, you just bend the mold and then very carefully go underneath the clay as it starts to separate, and you might want to use a little tool to help you do that. Now the center is just this little chess piece. It comes in two pieces, and I put it together, glued it, and then I cut off the little top thing that you see at the top, and I'm talking about what you see at the top left in this image. So I snipped that off because I needed a bigger base to put the larger part of the fountain on. And I didn't do anything to this other than just paint it. Then the next thing you see is a little wooden bowl that I had. This was just in my stash. That was just kind of the right scale. And I didn't want to have to fill the whole thing with whatever. And I needed also some kind of stand for the top piece to sit on, because I didn't want to lose any of the detail from the clay stand that I made. So I just took a stack of little wooden things that I had and built that up so that that was at the height of the top of that little bowl. And then I used another mold from my stash to create the little pieces that you see around the little, they're kind of shell type pieces that go all the way around. And one thing to think about is when you look at a mold, you know, you see this big image, and if you look at the mold on the right, you see this big old image, and you think, okay, well, that's too big for what I'm working with. Well, you don't have to use the whole part of the mold. For instance, if you look below, I have made a mold using the whole piece of the very bottom there of that mold, that long image, and I made it. I let it dry, or almost dry, pulled it out, I cut it in half, and then put it together, and that gave me the negative and positive of the image. But if I needed little pieces, I could just put clay in little sections of that and only use little pieces of it. And that way I can get smaller parts of it and not feel like, well, I can't use this at all because it's just too big for the project that I'm using. So that ended up being my center section. So I glued those two together before they were completely dry, and then made sure that they stayed together and let them completely dry. Now, paper clay likes to warp, so if you're letting anything dry outside of the mold, you do need to watch it or put a little bit of pressure on it to keep it from twisting or warping. And once the outside kind of dries, then you won't worry. You have to worry about damaging the image that's on it, and then that will end up getting glued on top of that little stack of wood pieces that I put in the middle of the bowl. Now the next thing is the frozen water coming out of the top of the fountain, sprays of the water. And so again, I'm turning to the transparency film and cutting it into small strips. And I decided for the thing to hold all these at the top, I would use this miniature flower pot. And I chose that simply because it had a nice size opening to glue all these different sprays. Now I tried this two different ways. The first way I did it is I applied the glossy accents to the strips first and let it dry. And that didn't work so well. And the reason is that you want it to bend. And that's the beauty of the transparency film, is it wants to bend and it wants to arc nicely. But the problem was, once it's all dry, it's very stiff. And if you go in and start trying to break it to make it arch, pieces of the diamond dust start to fall off. So I went to plan B, which was to first glue all of the strips into this pot, which I had already painted. And then once everything was really nicely dried, and I used E6000 for this, so I'd get a really good bond, then I went back in and added, you can see in the picture in the middle, I added some glossy accents, and I just did this a couple at a time, and then held it up and sprinkled the diamond dust on. Now you want to alternate on sides of this, or otherwise it's going to fall over. Now I did use something to attach a sticky thing to attach the pot to the top of this jar so that it would stay in place. But I did notice as I was doing this, if you're even with that, if you get too much weight on one side, then it's going to start to tilt and fall. So just make sure that you kind of go around putting the diamond dust on so that it's not all in one section. And then I made the strips a little bit longer than they needed to be, because you can always trim them. And I actually wanted to get this on the fountain so I could decide exactly how long I wanted these to be. And then at the end there, you can see the last picture. You can see now I've got them all on there. It's drying, and I also added some of the diamond dust crystals to the center as well. And that kind of covers up the glue, and it also looks nice and frozen. Now here you can see the final stages of the fountain. I've got all the pieces glued together on the far left, the first picture, and I put my first coat of paint on it. Then the next section, with my finger, I've rubbed on 2 lighter coats of paint just to give it a little bit more dimension. And then now I've started to add snow and ice. You can see the icicles around the bowl part. You can see that I've added snow in the top bowl, the bottom bowl, and I've also added snow around the edges of the top and bottom bowl. And then I've also added some snow to the center decorative piece. And then in the last picture, you can see that I've now glued the pot on the top of everything. Again, I used E6000 for all this because it's you really want a very good bond and you don't want this to fall apart. And then you can see now that I've gone in and I've trimmed my my sprays, various lengths for the frozen sprays that come out of the fountain. And so this is a really nice project just to do all by itself. If you just want to make a fountain for something that you have, maybe another miniature that you have. And you can kind of see, it's not a complete picture, but you can kind of see that that it's on its own separate piece. There's a base made out of the heavy chipboard. It's covered with the stone paper. I've used the wall image behind, and I've also attached one of the sparkling trees. Now, this is a good example of another way to give more support for something that you're sticking on a small base. The wall is supported with heavy chipboard behind it, or I'm sorry, a couple layers of lightweight chipboard and another image of the wall behind. But the tree is glued to the wall and it's glued to the base. So not only is the wall glued to the back of the base, but the tree acts as an anchor by gluing it to the wall and to the base itself. So anytime you're working with anything and you can give it extra anchor points because you've got things that are in front or behind, or actually it would have to be in front, things that were in front of whatever you're trying to, you know, suspend behind some kind of a base. If you can glue that thing to the floor and to the back, then that's extra support for that. And then I've also, you see a little rabbit there, and then there is one of the statue type things, decorative things. And then this little base, I cut it 9.5 inches long by 2 inches wide. And then the center part, though, is cut out further, another 4 inches to accommodate the fountain. Now this is a separate piece, so it's not attached, it's just sitting there. Now on the other side is another separate piece. Now this base is 9.5 inches by 2 inches wide. Again, I've got the wall behind, the tree. It's done the same way as the other side. The only difference is you don't have that center part that juts out 4 inches. And now I've got the sleigh with a couple of ladies, and that's coming in a project that I'm doing next on my blog. So it's more of a romantic one. And then below, I wanted to show you how I suspend a complicated image like that. First thing is I didn't want to have to cut this out twice. And do an opposite images, because it's a pretty complicated cut as it is. So I needed to make sure that I had some support, because when the sleigh is on the ground, the horses are kind of a little bit up in the air. And so again, I used a piece of balsa wood across that area that's up in the air to make that very rigid and be supported. And then for the support for the bottom of the sleigh to be so that it had a wide enough area so that it would stand and then support these horses up in the air, I use flat beads, and I use flat beads all the time for images that are suspended. So this is another thing, like if you're not going to be able to see this, then don't worry about it. You can use other objects to give you surface area to glue a paper image like this. And so I just used a row of beads, enough that I thought I could get good contact, and then glue those in place. And then if you want to, you can go behind that, add some clay, cover it with snow. You'll never see any of that. Now we're back to the full scene. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I've given you some ideas on how to add some wintry elements to your own projects. And of course, if you are interested in doing some of the things that I've done here, that's great too. As usual, Alpha Stamps carries pretty much everything I've used in this project, except for a couple of things from my stash. They also carry quite a large number of molds for clay or resin, and in case you're interested in more molds, or you want to use something different than what I used. If you go to my blog, there are lots of detailed pictures. There's about 25 if you want to look at more detailed at the individual elements. There's also a detailed supply list, links to Alpha Stamps, and more information on my collage sheets. I hope you've enjoyed this, and stay tuned for my next video.